And welcome, everybody. I think we have attendees entering the room. Thank you, Juan, for creating the platform. And welcome to all those who are attending today. My name is Rick Bell, and I'm privileged to be on the board of the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event, which is the 9th in a year-long series of discussions with thought leaders from around the world on progress toward greener cities. First, a couple of logistical points for architects AIA members who are seeking continuing education credits. That's through self-report. We'll have learning objectives if they're not already there on the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization website. I think you just need to go to the AIA national website under transcript, and it's a fairly easy process. The organizer of the series is the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. As I mentioned, it's a not-for-profit organization based in New York that builds connections between the United Nations, the design professions, academia, and allied associations. The stated purpose of the CSU is to advocate for responsible design and planning, increasing awareness about emerging issues and facilitating knowledge transfer between policymakers, urbanists, architects, academics, and activists. We do so by catalyzing cooperation and collaboration. At the same time, we promote the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, with particular emphasis on SDG 11 to, quote, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. We advocate for the new urban agenda adopted 5 years ago this month, well, actually last month, at the UN Habitat 3 meeting in Quito. And among those commitments are improving connectivity and supporting innovative and green initiatives and promoting safe, accessible, and green public spaces. Today is auspicious as COP26 continues, the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties taking place in Scotland. Its goals include securing global net zero by mid-century, keeping 1.5 degrees within reach, and working together to accelerate to tackle the climate crisis through collaboration between governments, businesses, and civil society. Speaking of collaboration, I'd like to thank our partners in the Green City series, starting with the UN Habitat Office in New York, the AIA New York chapter and its Planning and Urban Design Committee, UN Habitat Professional Forum, the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development based in New York, the Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, and Public Space at Columbia University, where I work, Creative Exchange Lab, Center for Architecture and Design, and our new partner, Global Urban Development, GUD, and especially Perkins Eastman for providing the platform for the series. I especially like to give a shout out to Juan Guaron and Corey Asen of the Perkins Eastman Sustainability team who are hosting this event with their WebEx platform. Lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out and thanks to Lance J. Brown. He's president of the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization for his leadership and for moderating the first 3 of the Green Cities talks earlier this year. Videos of all 8 of the talks that we've done from cities ranging from New York, Rio de Janeiro, Barcelona, Paris, Chouane, Los Angeles, Ljubljana, and Pittsburgh are or will be shortly on the CSU website, which is https://consortium for sustainable urbanization.org. No punctuation. Please also visit that website to see our other resources, publications, and upcoming events, including an announcement about the next Green Cities talk on Thursday, December 2nd. For today's program, please use the chat room function or the Q&A function to send me your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. Our guest today is Angela Tovar. Angela's worked as a community planner, a program manager, and climate and environmental justice advocate for over 15 years. In 2020, Angela was appointed as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago by Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Angela has committed to centering the City of Chicago's climate and sustainability agenda on equity and mitigating environmental harm in Chicago's most overburdened and underserved communities. She began her career in the public sector in 2019 as a program manager for Cook County Department of Environment and Sustainability, where she focused her efforts primarily on renewable energy programming. Prior to that, Angela worked in the South Bronx for over a decade, first as the Director of Policy for Sustainable South Bronx, and later as the Director of Community Development for the Point CDC. In these roles, she oversaw community partnerships, advocacy, and environmental justice efforts, and climate mitigation planning, including the development and implementation of a community-based climate resiliency initiative known as the South Bronx Community Resiliency Agenda. Angela's passion for social and environmental justice stems from her experience growing up on the industrial waterfront of Lake Michigan on Chicago's southeast side. She holds a BA in urban studies from the College of Charleston and a master's in urban planning from City University of New York, Hunter College. As an invocation for today's program, I'd like to quote a few lines by, very few lines by two Chicago poets. First, written in the late 1930s by South Side poet Margaret Walker. Our song has filled the twilight, and our hope has heralded the dawn. Let a new earth rise, let another world be born. And more recently, in her 2017 poem Free Range, Payuna Onomanu, an emerging writer, performer, and visual artist born and raised in the Jeffrey Manor neighborhood on the southeast side of Chicago, wrote, "This is my city plane, my city plan. Before I take flight, I sit perched on this land. Chicago, there's still time to do right by me." Without further ado, Angela, the screen is yours. What is Chicago doing right?
Thank you so much, Rick, for the introduction. I need to follow up with you to get that quote from the poet that you just read. I almost, that just drums up so many emotions for me, and would like to start by, and I think that you conveyed a lot of that in the intro, but would love to just start by telling you all a little bit of who I am. And I know that, you mentioned that I worked for a long time in New York City. I pursued urban studies as a career and later urban planning at Hunter. And I know that this is a primarily New York City based audience. And so it's great to be in company with people who understand some of the challenges in your city as well. When I started working in the Bronx in New York City, I really felt at home there. Hunts Point and the South Bronx more broadly mirrors some of the same challenges that we faced on the South Side. And, after Hunter, learning more about that community and then ultimately going to work at Sustainable South Bronx, it felt so familiar to me, right? Some of the issues with the balance between economic development and environmental justice that are at play there are very similar here too, right? We have post-industrial communities that are where big industries that have been globalized have transitioned on and have left very big footprints of brownfields, right? And communities that have been historically underserved by new efforts to revive their economies. And there's a struggle here between how do we attract new business and how do we do that? And does that have to happen at the expense of people's health and well-being, right? And that's a similar issue to what happens in the Bronx every day, just in terms of economic development and a lot of the challenges with growing an economy that's truck-based and truck-intensive. And a lot of the work that we started to do, or that I began doing at Sustainable South Bronx, was advancing what was already a really robust vision around building out a new economy, a green economy that was centered on clean energy, green infrastructure, and both serving people in a way that expands that economy, but provides those equitable co-benefits. And that was my first job in the environmental justice space. And then ultimately, after Hurricane Sandy, transition to the Point CDC and their work. So if you all are familiar with the two organizations, the Point is down the block, or at the time was down the block from Sustainable South Bronx. They're both in the Hunts Point community in the South Bronx in New York City, for people who are unaware of the neighborhoods. And they're in an environmental justice community. And transition to the Point largely because after Sandy, it was so revealing that this wasn't just a fight about environmental justice, that this was also a fight for climate justice as well. And the Point at the time was leading a very important dialogue about the compounding impacts of climate change on communities that were already suffering from environmental justice. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that conversation. There was an opportunity for me to transition in and to lead some of that resiliency work that the organization was leading. And I served as director of community development there for about 5 years until I decided to come back to Chicago to, not necessarily to take a job in the public sector. I wanted to stay in this space and knew it was very important to me and wanted to contribute back to my hometown to take some of the lessons that I learned in New York to really support the network of frontline communities that exist here that are fighting some of the same fights, and to just really dedicate my time and my energy to supporting that work here, and found a job at Cook County, but very quickly afterward, met and folks at the mayor's office. And if you all are familiar with Mayor Lightfoot's work, and if not, I will explain it to you. A lot of her work and the administration's work is really providing those hyperlocal solutions. So, there are so many historically underserved communities on our south and west sides here in the city that have been ignored. And we have historically, as we are investing in programming, have done so broadly that sometimes we're missing those communities that have been underserved. And I think the North Star of her work has been equity, and really understanding that it takes these hyper-local solutions, right? Really identifying very granularly parts of communities that have been ignored and disinvested in, and driving solutions and providing grant programming and economic development opportunities in those communities. And she was looking for someone who could help drive climate solutions in the same way. And, we felt right away that I was a match for that work. And so shortly after I arrived in Chicago, about 7 months later, transitioned to the city of Chicago to this job and this appointment. And I'll transfer into my work now. I have a presentation, but just wanted to provide that context for you all to talk about who I am first.
Thank you very much for that, because maybe during the Q&A period, we can come back to similarities and differences if relevant. But I appreciate your expanding upon the context and looking at the slides. I'm going to turn my video off.
Okay. So let me jump in here, and forgive me, I am not a WebEx person, so I'm going to try to do this right. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to move on. You've already heard my intro. One thing that I think, and so as I've already mentioned here, right, for me, this work is about environment and climate justice first, and really ensuring that our communities have what they need to thrive. What I don't think any of us have anticipated, at least in the last 18 months, is that this work would be is so much more important than ever, right? Because of the pandemic, because we saw, at least last year, just tremendous budget shortfalls at the city level. We saw the downturn of so many of our economic sectors, and this really has been a time where deep and systemic racial inequities have finally been exposed. And on top of that, we're seeing, again, just like this compounding layer of climate change and these disparate impacts on our Black and Brown communities here in the city. And so I felt very strongly about creating a couple of slides just to say that, it's now up to us at the City of Chicago to really reimagine our environment and sustainability priorities. And we want to ensure a just and equitable climate future for our city. And even on a deeper level, as I explained, the mayor's priorities, really ensuring that our goals as a city aren't just high level, greenhouse gas reduction goals, that we really create a roadmap so that we are driving deep benefits for our communities and our residents at a very granular level. And that's really important to the mayor. The charge here is all of our investments, including our climate investments, have to drive those equitable co-benefits that our communities need now more than ever. And so I think about this work in four ways. These are the four pillars that I use and that our team here at the Sustainability Office uses to guide this work moving forward, and how we are moving to achieve that just and equitable climate future. First and foremost, we cannot separate our profound environmental challenges from the importance of mitigating climate change, right? Sometimes those conversations are separate, right? We know that there are a lot of people or just a lot of efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, not always with an equity lens. People feel the urgency and would like to move, and we know that it's also critical for us to understand that as a baseline condition here in the city, and really cities across the country, certainly in New York City as well, that as a baseline, right, there are communities, low-income communities and communities of color that will be disproportionately burdened by the climate crisis, largely because they're already dealing with environmental overburden. They're dealing with public health issues. They're dealing with other environmental challenges, and we have to understand the root causes of those challenges and really design our work to mitigate those. Secondly, Chicago has a long history of ambitious planning efforts around climate. Our first climate action plan was in 2008. At that time, we committed to an 80% reduction by 2050 for our 1990 levels, which was an exciting effort to put forward, especially in 2008. That work was updated in 2015. The previous administration issued another plan which updated our goals to align ourselves with the Paris Climate Agreement. And then in 2017, the city committed to 100% renewable energy transition by 2025 for our own municipal buildings, and then a clean energy transition citywide 100% by 2035. And so those are commitments that, as this administration has transitioned in, we want to uphold, but also deepen those climate commitments. And that's work that's underway that I'll talk about in a minute. Again, this work, we have to apply an equity lens. So just even beyond acknowledging that there's, environmental challenges that exist, it's important for us just to make sure that we are practicing equity in all of our work, and that we're really using an equity lens to assess the cost and the burdens of all of the recommendations that we're putting forward as a sustainability team. And then finally, that we are driving those economic benefits that our communities deserve, so that we're thinking more holistically about these investments and these policy decisions to really ensure that we are thinking about, procurement opportunities, that we're thinking about community wealth building, that we're thinking about workforce development, that we're thinking about leadership opportunities and other resources that can be an outcome of these investments. And you all may have seen this before. This is from the Center of Social Inclusion. We use this a lot here to talk about equity as an outcome and a process, right? So this is not only about designing outcomes where communities have what they need to thrive, and that's for all communities across the board, but this is also in process, right? And really ensuring that those most impacted by structural racial inequity are meaningfully involved in the creation and the implementation of policies and practices that impact their lives. And so we have done a great deal of, spent a great deal of time here in our office really thinking about our levels of engagement and if we're properly coordinating efforts with communities and how we are designing systems to better understand how we can work in partnership with folks, but also how we can co-design some of the policies that we are moving forward. And so, you know, that takes work, right? I've heard someone say that equity is like yoga. You can't just attend one class and feel like an expert. It takes time and practice, and it's something that everyone has the opportunity to improve upon. So we've started that work to really think about how we meaningfully partner and engage with communities, particularly our frontline communities. And there's always more work to do to make sure that we're designing meaningful opportunities to work in coordination with folks. And so this is just a snapshot. Last year, the mayor announced a green recovery agenda, which was an exciting effort that we put forward that pretty much just summarizes what I just mentioned, right? There are a series of strategies that we want to drive as the city of Chicago to both mitigate the impacts of climate change, to build resilient communities, and then again, to drive equitable co-benefits. And I'm going to talk about 4 of these and largely our clean energy work, but wanted to share with you so that you can see a snapshot of the full agenda here. Some of this work, again, going back to the root causes of environmental challenges. We're doing a lot of work right now with land use and zoning to really examine the gaps in our zoning code that lead to environmental overburden and in some cases environmental racism, right? How the siting of facilities concentrated in communities of color have disproportionately impacted people over time and how we can address that. And that's something that we're committed to. There are a number of clean energy things that are happening here, which I'm going to go into detail in a minute. But some of the other highlights here, we have a comprehensive waste study that we just released. Chicago has a performs pretty poorly in terms of recycling. Our diversion rate is really low, and we want to create a more circular system, and that means we need to invest in a number of strategies to try to build out a circularity here in our waste system. And so it's a very exciting moment for us. We just released a report that examines our current system and outlines strategies for us to do better in that space. And we've committed some resources to launching some more strategies related to organics diversion in particular, which is exciting, and moving away from the traditional blue cart, black cart system that the city uses for recycling and for waste, and thinking about other strategies and other materials that can be diverted is where that work is headed. And we've done a tremendous amount of work in transportation, and 2 things to highlight that have been driven by this team in coordination with CDOT is our e-scooter pilot and also the expansion of Divvy Bike to communities on the south and west side. And in both cases, this is just giving people more low carbon mobility options. And that's especially important here in the city of Chicago. Unlike New York, some of our neighborhoods on the far reaches of the city don't have access to public transportation in the same way. And this provides an opportunity for people to get around their communities and sort of meet that gap with low carbon mobility options. And the rest of these slides I'm going to get into right now. So wanted to focus today on 4 of the strategies that we're moving forward: building decarbonization, our utility franchise agreement, our 100% renewable transition, and our climate planning work. And this really makes up the core of the green recovery agenda. Although, as we continue to build things out, we will continue to add to these strategies. And so I'm going to talk about all 4 of these in detail now. And this is a picture of the mayor on Earth Day at one of our community centers here in the Uptown community in Chicago, where they are pursuing a net zero building. This building in particular, it's called the Institute for Cultural Affairs. They're a building that hosts over 20 nonprofit organizations and are the largest social service provider in the Midwest. And so not only are they expanding their renewable energy on the rooftop, or they are also pursuing deep retrofits and are using passive house principles for the design of the retrofit of their building. So it's a really excited effort underway. The woman in the yellow sweater is the chief operating officer there and has been leading this work. And then the other woman behind the mayor in the green is Naomi Davis, who runs an organization called Blacks in Green, and is a frontline leader who is advancing something called the Sustainable Square Mile in her community. So just really exciting work, and it was a pleasure to join these women leaders who are really advancing the climate agenda for the city. So we're starting with decarbonization even ahead of our climate planning work, because we know that that's the largest source of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Chicago. And the moment is now to move forward, right? We also have these goals already, both climate action plan goals and our community-wide goal of 100% renewable energy for our buildings citywide by 2035. So the time is now, and this is what really the first effort that we move forward. But for us, much like all of our work, right, we have to drive solutions that provide opportunities for people to participate in this process. And so we've charged the team of people that are working on our decarbonization effort to really think about how we lower the economic burden on residents and businesses, how we reduce energy insecurity for communities of color, and how, as we develop these strategies, how we can use this equity lens to, again, assess the cost and the burden. The exciting thing about decarbonization for us and the way that we have, shared these opportunities publicly in the city is that, we don't have to wait for new technologies to emerge. And the time is now. We have, opportunities now to decarbonize using, and at the time of new construction, changing our building code to make sure that we're building to the highest efficiency standards, which is exciting. We are promoting energy efficiency first, always, just to lower our energy consumption. We are thrilled at the opportunity to advance on-site renewable energy where possible, and also just expanding opportunities here in the city of Chicago for off-site renewable energy where not possible. And then, of course, embracing electrification, right? We know that that is the most viable option that we have for decarbonization in our building sector, and are excited to explore and pilot new technologies to help folks make this transition here in the city. We have 51 members of our working group for decarbonization. Which is really exciting. Traditionally this work has been held by a small set of technical experts who have advised the city, and we're really proud to say that we've really expanded the conversation to ensure that frontline leaders are part of this, to ensure that we have tenant rights advocacy organizations that are part of this, affordable housing folks that are in this conversation, community leaders, economic development and community development folks at the table. And so having such a diverse set of experience and perspectives was really critical to us. We've been meeting since June to craft a set of decarbonization strategies for the city, and we are wrapping up that process now. And the subgroups that have been meeting, so these 51 members have organized themselves into subgroups, and we are talking about new construction, designing our building code to ensure that we're building to the highest creating the highest efficiency standards as possible, and eliminating fossil fuels in our buildings. Existing buildings, thinking about the elimination of fossil fuel, but also really honing in on our existing benchmarking ordinance, and also the potential for building performance standards, so we can think about accelerating retrofits in the city. And then, of course, and I think the most important piece here is, if we want to do this equitably, we need to make sure that we're building out the programmatic elements, the technical assistance, the financing, and just the support it would require to have our full building stock make this transition. And so that group has really been charged with understanding and designing solutions that support people. We want everyone to be successful here, right? We want, this is a win for our entire city, and we want to make sure that we're building and designing solutions for everyone. And this working group has been charged with, if there are challenges here, if there are nuances here, really lean into those. We want to explore and really understand those barriers to participation right away so that we can design better solutions. And this is just a snapshot of all of the folks that have been a part of that working group. Again, just a diverse set of stakeholders here: labor, community organizations, other nonprofits, a lot of technical advisors, a lot of design professionals. And it's been a really wonderful opportunity to work with a wide range of folks. It's been really great. And then next, as demonstrated on this timeline, these are the meetings that we've had as a working group, and people have met offline and informally too. We have a review committee, some working group members who are coming together to help fine tune the report that we've drafted. And then we are in the process now of finalizing that report and are presenting back to our working group if people feel comfortable with the recommendations, when people feel comfortable with the recommendations and that it's reflective of the conversations that we've had. We are going to go back to folks at the city to present, and then we'll move forward with this group of people who really become, the people that will drive this work forward into implementation. The next thing that I want to talk about quickly, and I will speed up a little bit because I recognize that it's already, the half hour has passed, and I want to leave room for conversation. The electricity franchise is our second work here. So the city has an electricity franchise with agreement with ComEd, our utility provider. It has only been evaluated twice in the modern history of Chicago, once in 1948 and then the last time in 1992. So this is the first time in nearly 30 years that it's up again. And this becomes a conversation for us about how do we have a utility partner that is helping the city and partnering with the city proactively to build the infrastructure that we need to make this transition, to make this renewable energy transition, right? How can we work together and beyond that, right? How do we drive the deep investments that we need to accelerate retrofits, to bring, household savings to our community residents, and instead of going directly into negotiation with our current utility partner, the city of Chicago, we made the decision to offer to release a request for information. And so we felt very strongly that we owed it to our constituents to explore the energy landscape and, to determine if this is the right structure and the right utility partner, or if there is potentially another pathway to delivering affordable services to our residents and our business. We got a lot of responses from folks, both the small models for how we could advance, our utility franchise, and then just other respondents who answered the call. And we are evaluating those responses now, and that will determine our next course of action. I kind of just said that I forgot the slide was here, but it's very similar to what I just said. So I'm going to skip this one. And the most important thing here is for us, this is about what we're calling our energy and equity agreement, right? We're taking note from Minneapolis that did something similar in that when their franchise agreement was up, they really came to the table with their utility provider to make sure that all of these things were accounted for in their process, right? And these are things that we want to see from our utility provider moving forward. So we want to see a deep investment in equity and neighborhood development. Again, we want to make sure that we're building the grid of the future and that we have a true partner in electrification here. And that we want to make sure that we are that there's accountability mechanism for our utility, that they're committed to ethics reform, that they are thinking about traditional rate making processes. And if anybody is watching the utility landscape, our current utility has been under fire from those things at the state level. And so we just really want to make sure that they're accountable and transparent as we move forward. 100% renewable is the third element here of our green recovery agenda. I'm limited as what I can say here because this is an active procurement, but I will say that the city is in the process of evaluating or has an RFP, an active RFP out for our energy supply contract, which will, be the energy supply contract that will get us to 100% renewable. One of the exciting things as part of that contract is that we have a provision in there that at a minimum allows for or requires that 50% of the energy supply comes from new build generation right here in the Chicago region. So we do anticipate that when we wrap this up, that this will also include, and we've allowed that contract flexibility to include a power purchase agreement. So we do anticipate that a large solar or wind farm will come out of this that will service the city of Chicago. We've also integrated and have asked the respondents to also include local economic development and equity benefits as part of their plan. And this is just a glimpse of our evaluation term, right? This is what we're using to evaluate those benefits, and that was incorporated into our scoring of the responses. So what does community benefits look like? What does the local supply chain look like? Where are the long-term and short-term job opportunities for the city of Chicago in here? How are we creating, diversity in the retail supply company? Or what is the diversity in the retail supply company? What does the leadership look like? What is the diversity in the developer companies? And so this is just an indication of how we're evaluating and scoring the responses in order to make sure that we're maximizing opportunities for local residents here in the city. And then finally is the last thing that I will mention is our climate action plan. Our climate action plan, again, the last time the city had one was in 2008. We feel very strongly that it's time for the city to update our plan to ensure that we are, addressing greenhouse gas emission reductions in not only in buildings, which, that plan is already underway, which will fold nicely into our climate action plan. That we're also thinking about waste and transportation. And then, of course, for us, this also means just going back to the equitable co-benefits piece, right? We want to think beyond just the plan for emissions reduction. We also want to make sure that we're thinking about how we're driving household savings, that we're thinking about how to achieve environmental justice and really creating those healthy and sustainable communities at a hyperlocal level. And that we're thinking about community health and well-being within the context of this planning effort. Those are all things that are equally critical to the decarbonization piece and are front and center in our planning efforts. And that plan is underway. Right now, we are transitioning to our next phase, which is public engagement, and we'll be encouraging folks from all over the city to provide feedback. And this is another place where we have worked with community partners to help co-design some of the framing and to get a lot of feedback on how we can meaningfully work with folks in communities to really build out the plan in a way that really mirrors what their priorities are, particularly for communities on the front lines. Sorry. Yeah, I thought I had one more slide. And then I will just end by sharing some exciting news from the city. We just passed our budget on Wednesday of last week, which was, for passing a budget is always challenging, right? It requires multiple hearings and questions from our city council. We refer to our council people as alders, our alder people, aldermen and women, and it requires back and forth. People have questions. Again, all of our commissioners go to hearings to present their budgets, and then there is a big vote. And this year, of course, with the influx of ARP dollars at the federal level to cities throughout the country, we wanted to and put forth a really exciting, what we're calling the recovery budget for the city. And so there were many programs that were proposed in the budget which passed, that made it, that were really aimed at addressing the acute needs that people have in their communities. And we were given the opportunity from the mayor to include a really exciting and robust environmental justice and climate investment package. And I'm really happy to say that this is the largest investment in the city's history, $188 million. It's the largest one-time payment. And we certainly know that it's not going to sufficiently address all of our environment and climate challenges in the city, but we're calling it a down payment and a commitment to using this money to, meaningfully jump into this work, and then also to continue to drive resources to meaningfully make the transition that our community requires. And so we have here, investments in community and environmental justice work. That's a wide range of investments. We worked with a lot of community partners to identify projects. So some of those funds will go into preserving a trail on the south side, to low carbon mobility projects, to environmental justice infrastructure funding, to expanding our air quality monitors in the city. There's a wide range of things in that bucket. And energy and equity, that some of that money will go to a retrofit program for low to moderate income housing, single family and 2 flats, and then also a multifamily affordable housing retrofits as well. We're also using that money to retrofit our anchor institutions, community anchor institutions. So really stacking on the work that our Department of Planning and Development is doing with revitalizing anchor institutions and communities on the south and west side. We are advancing or expanding on the amount of investment that is dedicated now to our tree canopy. So we're, investing $46 million in trees to expand our tree canopy, which is the largest investment that the city has seen. It's a very exciting opportunity. We have a new strategy to really work with our public health data and with community tree stewards to make sure that we are investing in trees in communities that need them the most. And then finally, green infrastructure projects. A bulk of this funding goes to our Resilient Schoolyards project. The city has a really exciting program called Space to Grow, which is done in partnership with Chicago Public Schools. A lot of this fund goes to expanding that program and making sure that they have the funds and resources necessary. And then a few hyperlocal green infrastructure projects that need additional funding. So I will pause there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Angela. Let me see if I can turn my screen back on. I'm also not familiar with WebEx as much as Zoom, so I might just have to do a voiceover until I figure out how to do that, but bear with me. There's one question right away from a member of the audience and colleague from the CSU, and that's Eric Winkler, who's actually asking 2 questions. You mentioned community participation strategies. As you know from New York, and I know from my work at DDC in New York, and previously working for the Bronx Borough President a long time ago, it's sometimes hard to get people who are very, very busy working 2 jobs, or at least not available when meetings are taking place or hearings are taking place, to fully participate. Have you been able to come up with innovative strategies to assure adequate community input?
Yeah, I think that, and I don't know the answer entirely, right? I think what is working for us at the moment is really creating deeper partnerships with community organizations. And, I think that this just mirrors some of the work that we were able to achieve at the Point CDC toward the end of my time there. And I think that work has continued on. At the time I was leading the South Bronx Resiliency Agenda, which was, a community-based effort to sort of answer the call and to weave in some of the community priorities as, 100 Resilient Cities was happening. And there was that funding that was granted to the city from HUD at post-Sandy, right? And so I think where we were most successful as a community organization was when we had those, relationships with agency partners, and it wasn't seen as, hey, there's this community meeting, can you hand out this flyer and we will take your input, but really like, let's put our heads together and sort of co-design solutions here. And I think we have been really open to creating spaces where we are not coming in with all of the solutions already cemented, right? That we are open to co-designing outcomes and saying, look, here's the challenge, thank you, or you all tell us the challenges, and let's put our head together and sort of really work to co-design outcomes to collectively. And we've been trying to model that. And, are we reaching everyone because of challenges related to work? No, but I think we have been more intentional of just understanding how we can reach people and allowing for community partners to lead us to say, this is, an anchor institution that we need to brief and, provide materials to, or, let's get these folks at the table, or would you mind, presenting at 2 different times, and we can work with you to do the organizing to make that happen. So it's not a perfect system. It's something that we're modeling here in the mayor's office, and there's always room, to work with other departments to model those same strategies. It's taking time, but it's something that we're committed to building.
It's a good answer. I'll come back to Eric's other question in a moment, but I was intrigued by your discussion of hyperlocal, which allows for, concentrating on differential needs of neighborhoods. We had in the last month's presentation by Ray Gastel, who I'm sure you know and remember from his work in New York, and he was talking though about eco districts in Pittsburgh, and examples that he'd also seen when he was out in Seattle. How that relates to electrification, energy equity, neighborhood budgeting, participatory budgeting. Could you touch a little bit on how Chicago fares in that regard?
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that's been so critical for us as we think about this decarbonization strategy is just that, right? Which is why it was so important for us to apply that equity lens, and to really make sure that we were working with folks to build such a big table of people that served as stakeholders in this process. And the 51 members of our working group, that is not, the total amount of people exceeds that, right? That we talked to as part of this process. Those were just the people that we recruited to remain on, to co-design these solutions with the mayor's office. The group of people that we talked to and had conversations with, probably quadrupled the number from the 51. But so we talked to hundreds of people, and it was important for us to not only have sector-specific conversations to think about those best opportunities, but to also extend those opportunities to community partners, people that know their communities the most, right? And Chicago is an interesting place. Not all of our frontline communities are multifamily, are communities that have a high volume of people living in there, right? We have a lot of single family home communities that are also communities on the front lines. And so for us, it's really about understanding the building typologies, and we're doing a lot of work. And so one example that I can give is that, we're doing work with one of our local energy nonprofits here to identify communities that are, have the highest energy burden, and to understand the most common building typologies that exist in those communities, and to think about how we design retrofit packages that will address their concerns. And so really getting, changing the scope of how we design our solutions so that it's very specific to different neighborhoods, and to really designing it around, the most common, again, just like the building typologies that exist here. And that's very common in Chicago. We have a lot of neighborhoods where the houses look the same. And I think really understanding those neighborhoods in particular and building those solutions has been a really great exercise. And then as we are investing money in the retrofit, I think we have worked with the energy nonprofit it's called Elevate Energy. They actually work nationally, so maybe you all have heard of them. We have worked with them and with others to really build out, a pipeline of of houses that are experiencing energy burden that would be good candidates for this work. And so, but just that commitment, I think, to understanding the data at a granular level, to working in coordination with Elevate and other partners to really build out that pipeline, I think is a demonstration of how, if we are effective, if we want to lead on decarbonization work, it's going to require that commitment, that hyperlocal commitment to really understanding the neighborhoods, the building typologies, and really partnering with communities to say, we have an opportunity here. Let's work together so that we can drive a retrofit program that reaches people in these households. And that's really important to us.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you brought up retrofits, because when you're talking in the slide about equitable decarbonization, I think there are four bullet points, and starting with new construction and energy efficiency, renewable energy, and electrification. And new construction is easier in some regards to regulate, and whether it's talking about mechanical systems or energy standards. The economic incentives for retrofits uh, aren't always there, at any scale, whether it's in large scale public housing or in individual, one or two family homes. In New York and Chicago aren't all that different in that regard. We've struggled with that in New York, and local laws go so far. My question, because you did talk also about benchmarking and performance standards, could you relate both of those to time frame, and what are the expectations, particularly with this wonderful budget? And thank you for ending with that, because what great news, and what a clear commitment on the part of the mayor, and the budgetary process. But how does it relate to the time frame? Is my question.
Yeah, so I I don't want to reveal too much because our recommendations haven't been put up formally, but I think all of these things are within the scope of where we're headed, or are within the scope of the working group, and we will be presenting a report publicly, hopefully by the beginning of next year, that will have goals and recommendations for how we move forward. And so I will say that well, I can't really say what the timeline is now, because I think it's going to be contingent on the release of the report. But certainly, Chicago has a great foundation in that we already have a benchmarking ordinance, right? Which is exciting. We do update our building code pretty frequently, every couple of years. So there's an opportunity there. We already have a voluntary retrofit program where, big buildings throughout the city, and also a lot of neighborhood anchor institutions also voluntarily join our retrofit program and get technical assistance to make the transition. That work is already underway. We're partnering with the EPA right now to look at industrial energy efficiency. These are all things that are happening, and just Elevate and other nonprofits provide a service, and there are some resources at the state level for retrofit already. So all of those things are exciting, and they're already happening, and which allows us a solid foundation to build off of. So our work will explore building performance standard and a couple of other tactics to try to get us there, and we will have some harder goals that we will present out. I will say that we looked at 12 North American cities to learn about best practices. We talked to a lot of folks, New York, and learning, from Mark Chambers before he transitioned out, and other folks at New York City, about Local Law 97 was certainly something that was important to us. And so we did take a great deal from New York, from Boston. Denver just passed or has some great decarbonization goals and has been leading on some work. So we did talk to a lot of cities throughout the country to learn about best practices and to talk about barriers for implementation. So I was really excited to take feedback away from them as well.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. And part of the impetus to this Green City series is to allow for those sharings of ideas, best practices, and cities learning from each other. When we had public officials from Ljubljana in Slovenia presenting, I learned that they were doing a green building inventory for all buildings, public and private. And that's something that we don't quite have, yet in New York. And I wonder about Chicago, but I'd like to just follow up on some of the things that you touched on, sort of like a city planning hearing or a city council hearing, where I'd like to ask you to expand a little bit on wind power, because when we talk about electrification in not just New York City, but in the metropolitan region, in New York State, New Jersey, increasing hopes are being placed on offshore wind power, and it has its detractors as well, but generally is seen as part of the solution for increased amounts of electrification, including electric vehicle charging stations, not relying on hydroelectric power from Quebec, and certainly with Indian Point closing, not relying on either old-fashioned or newfangled nuclear. All that to say, is wind power in the immediate future, or are there wind farms on the lake or on other land in or near Chicago? How is that developing?
Yeah, I think it's an exciting prospect for the city. Chicago is surrounded by, we're in the Midwest, right? So there is an abundance of land surrounding Chicago in Indiana, in Southern Illinois, in Central Illinois, right? And you're seeing the industry really boom, right? I think for us, it's certainly interesting, and which is why, in our energy supply contract, we created that provision so that we could, support new build generation, and we know that will mean, a large scale wind or solar farm that will emerge to support this project. And so that's something that we wanted to be supportive of. I think the bigger challenge for us has been, how do we drive those co-benefits, right? That are so important to us as we make this investment, and really making sure that there is a pathway for deep investments through this project back in the city. But it's certainly, if you take a drive from Chicago down to Southern Illinois, it's very interesting and exciting to see the amount of wind farms that have popped up on farms, throughout the Midwest, but certainly in Illinois. And I know that there is a lot of generation, a lot of companies that are investing in these wind farms here. So it's really great to see that the industry emerge in that way here in Illinois.
And Angela, perhaps my last question, coming back to the central thrust of the presentation, was about equity and the differences that we saw not only with the pandemic, but start there, but even previously, comparing asthma rates in South Bronx and in Harlem to other neighborhoods in New York, and perhaps even in a post-industrial economy, there are differential rates of pollution and concurrent public health problems, individual health problems. Um, um, that was touched on, in talking in your discussion about community health under the Climate Action Plan. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how perhaps your office is working with health department or other health providers in Chicago on bringing issues of environmental justice to to that personal level? The pandemic has changed people's attitudes about what's expected, and justifiably so.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical piece, which is why I think, like, in the beginning, I talked about that we can't separate the underlying health issues to this conversation about climate and sustainability. And I think it's, easy or it's not easy, but I think sometimes they're compartmentalized and, aren't part of the same discussion. But we've really tried to work in partnership with our health department. I think that they're probably the department that we work with most closely on this, right? We certainly know that there are opportunities for us to improve public health, and I think that that's a conversation that lies in our decarbonization conversation, as we're thinking about, cooking gas and some of the impacts. It's certainly a conversation when we're thinking about underlying health conditions in our community that make people more vulnerable. And as we're thinking about our land use reform, the impetus for that was a report that our health department did called the Air Quality and Health Report, where they did an analysis of communities throughout the city of Chicago, and looked at different variables, including their own public health data, but also just pollution exposure and concentration of industry in communities to identify communities that were most vulnerable to air quality. And we have seen them really step up as partners to help us, advance our air quality reform agenda. But even in like another example is community trees, right? And understanding that climate change and these underlying health conditions will make people especially vulnerable to heat, right? That has been working with the Department of Public Health, and our equitable tree strategy has been an incredible effort. They provided public health data and a lot of support in identifying communities and working with them, and this like network of community tree stewards. We have really I outlined a plan to target specific blocks within communities for investment first, and that has been a really exciting effort and a great partnership.
Well, I have to say I'm most impressed by how the administration, Lightfoot administration, and the comprehensive climate action plan is advancing and now budgeted to implement strategies that position Chicago to achieve clean energy targets and reduce reliance on fossil fuels while delivering equitable co-benefits to residents and businesses. That's one of the learning objectives, by the way, in New York certainly has a lot to learn from what you and the mayor have been doing in that regard in Chicago. So thank you. Thank you very much, Angela, for your presentation today. There's a whole lot more we could discuss. An hour is never enough time to really do it justice, but thank you. I'd also like to thank all those who participated today from near and from far. Please join us next month on Thursday, December 2nd, for our next Green Cities Talk with Young Kai Saw, talking about Singapore and their action plan. The moderator will be CSU President Lance J. Brown, who I think has joined us from Madrid. Welcome, Lance. Thank you all for coming, and especially thank you, Angela. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's a pleasure.
And mine as well. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.